Back when I was a teacher for a junior high school, we had a back to school night. And I remember a stressed out dad came up to me asking for help. And he essentially asked me what he needed to do in order to be a good dad for his son. During this time, I was in my mid-20s. And to this day, I don't have any kids. So looking back at it now, it makes me sad to think how much he had to have been struggling to seek help from a complete stranger. So in an effort to help men who either have kids or want to have kids one day, I want to cover the topic on how to be a good dad. And while I don't have any kids myself, I have a great dad, and I've been surrounded by great men in my life who have been faithful fathers. So as I go through these 8 steps on how to be a great dad, I will be speaking not from the perspective of a father, but from the perspective of someone who has an amazing dad and has been raised by other great men. So step number 1, lead by example. Titus chapter 2, verses 6 to 7. In the same way, encourage the young men to live wisely, and you yourself must be an example to them by doing good works of every kind. Let everything you do reflect the integrity and seriousness of your teaching. In this passage, Paul was talking to Titus, and he told him to be an example to the Christian young men around him by doing good works. So this first step to being a good dad is crucial, and it's to lead from the front and to lead by example. I see this a lot from my dad. I remember in the past, my dad would ask me to do the dishes or take out the trash, and as he asked me, memories of him doing the dishes and taking out the trash throughout the week started filling my mind. And back when we'd have family arguments, I remember him asking me to be patient with my mom and siblings. And as I sulked, I could only remember the times he was patient with my family. So whether you're a dad now or an aspiring dad, know this. As a father, you will have power as the lead male in the household. And you can either give orders, expecting those under you to fulfill them, or you can have the things that you ask be substantiated by the example that you give. And word of warning, should you set a bad example, understand that your children will either follow that example or be heavily influenced by it. If you look at 2 Samuel chapter 12, you'll see how David abused his power as king and slept with Bathsheba, the wife of one of David's mighty men. And it was after this act that King David's sons followed in his sexual immorality. To go more in depth, David had a son named Amnon, and Amnon's mother was Ahinoam, as seen in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 2. And David also had another son named Absalom by Maacah, and you see that in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 3. And Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar. And long story short, Amnon in his lust raped his half-sister Tamar. And to make matters worse, look at how King David responds in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 21. But when King David heard all of these things, he was very angry. So note that while King David was angry, he still did nothing. And Absalom was so upset with what Amnon did to his sister that Absalom murdered Amnon. And what's interesting is that David slept with Bathsheba in 2 Samuel chapter 12, and in the very next chapter, in chapter 13, David's son Amnon also sleeps with someone he wasn't supposed to. So if you're a dad, know that like David, you can set a very poor example if you're not careful. So if you want your children to go in a certain direction in life, lead from the front and show them how to get there by going there first. And if you're wondering what kind of example you should give, look at step number 2, love God first. Matthew chapter 12, verse 30. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. In this passage, Jesus says that the first commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the reason why this is so important is because I've heard how many parents make the grave mistake of making their kids their God. And everything revolves around their school, their schedule, and their future. And while it's good to make time for them and to invest in their well-being, loving God must be placed above loving your kids. And the reason why is because a person's purpose should be centered around God and not their kids or anything else. Because if someone's whole purpose in life is about ensuring their child's safety and satisfaction, they'll be missing out on a whole lot of life. You see, a dad is more than just a dad. A dad can also be a son, a brother, an uncle, a friend, a role model, a teacher, coach, leader, business owner, etc. And what I want you to see here is that being a father should be a part of a man's life, not the entirety of their life. And when a man chooses to follow God and love him first, God will start adding to a man's identity. The man who follows God will soon find that he's a beloved child of the Most High, one whose sins are forgiven and has a future and hope beyond death. And as they learn who God is, they'll start following God's example little by little. You see, by putting God first, a man will begin cultivating the type of character that will best lead his children. Because it's through God that a man could have victory over his anger, lust, pride, and selfishness. So remember, while it's important to love your kids and give them the best, you cannot give love if you don't have love, at least not for long. So love God, see his love, patience, and faithfulness towards you, and then see the strength, grace, and mercy that he offers and rest in that. And note that as you do this, your children will notice, and you'll be doing your children the greatest service because you'll be introducing them to who their creator is. And that leads us to step number 3. Train your child. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. In this passage, King Solomon tells his audience that children ought to be trained so that when they're older, they won't depart from their training. So one of the most important roles that a father must take is that of a leader and teacher. Because a good dad is one that looks ahead into the future and equips his children with skills, knowledge, or resources that will hopefully benefit them. My dad has a career in public safety, and growing up as a young boy, he taught me how to shoot a gun. And the reason why is because he said that if the city ever entered into a crisis and needed help, he'd be called to work, and it'd be my responsibility to watch over my mom and sister. And he started having these kinds of conversations with me since I was around 8. And it was good that he trained me, because back in 2020, Los Angeles went up in flames, and all law enforcement, fire, and medical personnel were called to the field. And just down the street from my house, there were riots, protests, and looting from tons of people. And thanks to my dad's training, I knew what to do. I sat my mom and my siblings down and told them the game plan if anything were to happen. And we all kept watch and kept my dad in prayer. You see, my dad knew that we didn't live in the best neighborhood, and he saw it fit to train his son, me, with firearms so I can protect myself and others. And I won't list all the other things my dad's trained me in, but if you're a father, I want you to imagine your child as an adult. What would you like for them? Would you want them to be close to God? Do you want them to be financially responsible? Or do you want them to be a hard worker or disciplined? You see, you need to train those things now. As a teacher, I've learned that many times boys bond by doing things together and girls bond by talking through things together. So if you have a son, go play one of his games and have a conversation with him about something that you want him to start thinking about. And if you have a daughter, take her out for some ice cream and communicate with her some important principles that you want her to keep in mind. Step number 4, provide for your family. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8. But those who won't care for their relatives, especially those in their own household, have denied the true faith. Such people are worse than unbelievers. In this passage, Paul tells Timothy that those individuals who don't take care of those who live with them reject Christianity and are worse than unbelievers because many people who don't believe in God still take care of their families. To explain this a little deeper, look at 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us, and we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. In this passage, John tells us that we know love because Jesus died to save us. So from this passage, we understand what biblical love is, placing the needs of others above our own needs. In Jesus' case, he placed our needs above his own well-being, and he died on the cross so that by faith in him, we can go to heaven. So if a man doesn't work to take care of those in his household, he doesn't love them, because love would look like the man doing whatever he can to provide for his family. So if you want to be a good dad, you need to provide the main essentials for your children, and that means housing and food. Yes, obviously there's a lot more to provide for, and we'll get to that. But I don't want to take away the importance of a dad taking care of the essential needs of his family. He needs to make sure they have a place to stay and something to eat. And if he doesn't have them, he needs to work to make sure that those necessities are met. And to add, fathers should keep in mind that he doesn't need to provide for everything. After graduating high school, my dad sat me down and told me, Miles, when it comes to college, I'll support you by housing you and feeding you, but you need to pay for your own education. And this taught me responsibility. And through this, my dad helped to train me towards financial responsibility. So simply put, if you want to be a good dad, one of the necessary steps is to take care of and maintain all the physical needs of your home. And again, that includes housing and food. And I would even add protection to that list. Now, I'm not saying you need to get a gun to protect your household, but I do want to be realistic. The world has horrible people in it. people who would seek the harm of your spouse and children. So if physical protection is something that your family might need given your circumstance, I would advise you to do what's necessary to make sure that that need is met. And at the same time, fatherhood is more than just physical needs. So let's dive into step number 5. Seek to understand your children. Colossians chapter 3, verse 21. Fathers, do not aggravate your children, or they will become discouraged. In this passage, Paul is teaching fathers what to do when it comes to parenting, and he tells them not to aggravate or provoke their children, or else they'll get discouraged. Now, note in the Bible, there's not a lot of direct commands on how to be a good dad, so we have to pay attention when there is a direct command. And this passage in Colossians tells fathers directly not to aggravate their kids. And this can be easy to do, especially if dads come home from a long day at work and are responsible for the maintenance of a household. And as leader of the house, there's a certain power that comes with it, and that power can be used to give marching orders from a place of authority. I'm currently reading a book right now titled The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, and I love this book. And on page 228, in the Paradigms of Interdependence chapter, Stephen tells the story of how he was writing one day and how his kids were being especially loud. And while he was trying to be patient at first, he finally snapped when his son David started banging on the door of the bathroom yelling, "Let me in!" So Stephen came out and sternly told his son that it's so difficult to write with all this noise. And he told him to go to his room until he could behave. And later he found out that the reason why he needed to go into the bathroom was to get a towel for his brother who got hurt playing a game, but his sister wasn't opening the door because she was in the shower. So the issue here came from a place of misunderstanding, and it led to David feeling dejected and upset. So understand that your children need more than just someone to meet their physical needs. They also need someone to understand them. And I think one of the reasons why fathers can aggravate their children is because sometimes dads don't take the time to hear their children out. Like, you may know what your child wants to be, but do you know why? And your son or daughter might really be struggling with grades or accomplishing a certain task, and I'd tell you, you should try knowing why. Because I honestly think that one of the best things that you can give your child is the feeling of being heard and understood. Step number 6, love your wife well. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. In this passage, Paul tells husbands to love their wives in the same way that Jesus loved the church. And the way that Jesus loved the church was by giving himself on her behalf. So I need to stress the importance of loving your wife when it comes to being a dad. And mind you, the steps in this video are not organized by importance where step number 1 is the most important. I only put this step as number 6 because this step does not apply to every dad. So going back to the step, know that when it comes to your family, your walk with God is like the rock that you build your house on. And I'd argue that the foundation that holds your house together is your wife. Remember how I said that the Bible doesn't have many direct commands for fathers? Well, if you're a husband, this is one of those nice direct statements, and it says to love your wife. Look, I see my dad and what he had to do to raise me and my 2 siblings, and I'm sure he would tell you that he could not have done it without my mom. In fact, when I think about the man that I need to be, I think about how my dad treats my mom. I see how they argue and how they resolve arguments. And I see how he manages the money so that he can afford family trips, and I see how my dad supports my mom in her hobbies and her interests. And then I see how my mom supports my dad's vision to help the church in the Philippines, and how she loves to go shooting with my dad on his shooting trips, and how she thinks of him whenever she prepares food so that there's enough for him when he gets home. And what I see in them is a team that has been faithfully serving in ministry and diligently providing for the needs of their family. And to give a fun recommendation to dads who have wives, try reading The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. In the book, the author dives into the different ways people receive love, and he stresses the importance of speaking your partner's love language. Because a man might be showing his affection to his wife by washing her car, but if the wife's love language is quality time, then what she needs is not a clean car, but for her husband to sit down and talk with her after he gets home from work in order for her to feel loved. The idea is that many people feel loved in different ways. So partners should make it a point to know their partner's love language so that they can love each other and strengthen their relationship. To close this step, just know that divorce is a real problem. And I've seen many people devastated by the divorce of their parents. So another reason why it's important for husbands to love their wives is because Satan would like nothing more than to ruin families by breaking up a husband and wife, so that the aftermath can in turn devastate their children. So if you're a husband, know this. There's a reason why God told husbands directly to love their wives, and it's because he knows that women have a great need to be loved by their husbands. And after seeing my dad love my mom, I can attest that living under their loving care has been one of my biggest blessings and greatest advantages. Step number 7, don't play favorites. Genesis chapter 37, verses 3-4. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. In this passage, Israel, the son of Isaac, had a total of 12 sons, and he loved Joseph more than his other sons. And his brothers hated him for it, and their hatred soon led to the brothers selling Joseph as a slave. So when it comes to children, I found that kids have a deep longing to be loved by their dad. And for Israel to visibly show favoritism towards Joseph probably really hurt his other sons. And Israel's favoritism towards Joseph was probably the main reason why his family was so divided. Back when I was in high school, I was a punk and mean, and I didn't follow God yet in my life. But even though I was an evil kid that didn't really care about anyone or anything, I remember the times when my dad could not come to my football games and wrestling matches. In my voice, I said I didn't mind, and my body language definitely communicated indifferent and moody teenager. But in my heart, I knew I was sad when my dad didn't go to my games, and that I was secretly pleased when my dad did go and saw me perform well. And I say this because dads who watch this may not see much of a response from their kids. So from a son's perspective, don't be fooled by appearance, because I think deep down, there's a deep longing to be loved, accepted, and approved by our fathers. So if there's favoritism going on in your family, I would encourage you to get it out of your family ASAP. Because while it may help the favorite, it'll do more damage than you realize to your other kids. And step number 8, respect your child's decision. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. In this passage, we see that Eve and Adam ate the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, despite the fact that God told them not to. So when it comes to parenting, in the same way that God gave Adam and Eve the choice to either obey him or disobey him, the time will come when your child grows and begins making their own decisions on what they do with their life. And in the same way that God let Adam and Eve make their own decisions, you need to also when it comes to your kids as they reach adulthood. For me, back when I was in high school, I wanted a career like my dad's in public safety, and I pursued firefighting. And I took classes in college, became an ambulance operator, volunteered in search and rescue, and I sacrificed a lot of time in my pursuits. And I remember there was a point when I realized that I did not want to become a firefighter anymore. And I started leaning towards a career in teaching, and at first I felt guilty. I felt like I lost the camaraderie that I would have had with my dad if I had the same job as him. And I had to come to terms with the fact that I am not my dad. I won't be a fighter like he is, and he will always have a greater capacity to protect than I will, and I've learned to be okay with that. In fact, my dad sees how my giftings as a person are different than his, and he understands my call to teach and to help the church. And he's always been one of the first people to help my mission to Japan, and he always asks me about my YouTube channel. So say hi to him in the comments if you're watching this. So back to the point, if you're a dad, understand this. Your kids, while they are a kind of extension of who you are, they are their own individual. And while you can influence and support them, at the end of the day, it is their life. And there will be a time when you need to allow them to become the person God wants them to be, even if it's not what you expect. And on a separate note, I've known many parents whose kids either walked away from the faith or just don't follow God. And one of the constant things that I see in the fathers of those children is prayer for their salvation and attempts to point them back to God. So while I can't understand the pain of having an unsaved child, I know what it's like to desperately want someone to know God so that they can be saved. So my advice to you, pray without ceasing. Be an example to them on what it means to follow God, love them like no other, and then trust God with their life. Okay? So if you're a dad or want to be one, follow these 8 steps. Lead by example. Love God first. Train your child. Provide for your family. Seek to understand your children. Love your wife well. Don't play favorites. And respect your child's decision. So to all you dads watching, please know that if you fall short in any of these steps, that's normal. One thing that I can tell you for sure is that my dad and the 5 mentors who helped me in my life are far from perfect, but they're all fighters, and they're all still in the fight, loving God and loving their kids. So keep fighting, and as you do, always remember, Jesus loves you.